Hi, this is a video about changing my controls in a video game, but not just any video game. This is Team Fortress 2, made by Valve in the Source engine, and Source games typically have a very useful alternative method for key bindings, the developer console. Keys can be bound to any command, with commands starting with the plus also executing their minus-starting counterparts when the key is released. Aliases can be used to make new commands, and the wait command can delay commands after it, but this is based on the tick rate of the server you're on and sometimes it's disabled, so I won't be using it here. In-game, we can see that aliases specifically can be used to run a chat bind, run other aliases, redefine other aliases, and even crash the game. Lastly, text files named AutoExecRap or any of the 9 classes will run all their commands upon launching the game or when switching to this class. So, how do we use this? How far can we go? How well can we program with this? And might these configs even be Turing complete? This is the TF2 Keybinding Experience, featuring a working calculator. Now I do actually use the arrow keys, meaning there is a large distance for my hand to get to the number keys typically used for switching weapons. Thus I ended up using the scroll wheel to switch weapons, but this was still too slow for classes like Engineer and Spy who have more than 3 weapon slots. However, the actions used by the PDAs in Disguise Kit can also be emulated using console commands, and weapon scrolling can be restricted to the first 3 slots using aliases. So, this is what I used for some time, though such a system does have its problems. Aliases can't actually tell if a slot can be switched to, but since slot commands for the current slot are discarded, putting multiple slot commands on the same frame switches between the last 2. Unfortunately, the current weapon slot and the current alias still get desynced sometimes, so I'll improve upon this method later in the video. For now, let's see what else we can do to improve our keybinds with the developer console. You may think the slot command is the only way to switch weapons, but you can also switch to a specific weapon with the use command. It uses weapon entity names as its argument, a list of which can be found at the Valve Software Developer Wiki, though some weapons share the same entity name so you can't differentiate between them. Also, the Sapper requires a different command entirely, that being build ring 0. What this has to do with the taunting bind is simple. While the slot command seems to wait until the end of the frame before actually switching weapons, the use command doesn't, so following use of taunt will switch to a weapon and immediately perform its taunt, while following slot with taunt just taunts with your current weapon. What's even more interesting is that the use taunt trick allows you to switch weapons during humiliation. You can taunt kill during humiliation, by the way. I think everyone should do this because we do have to lose. Also, for Spy, you may want it to undisguise you first with this command, since you can't taunt while disguised, though this doesn't happen before taunting, so you have to press the button twice to do a guaranteed taunt. Also, you should avoid letting your main taunt key also undisguise you, as due to Source Spaghetti, only a key bound to plus taunt directly, which, yes, is a different command to taunt, will allow you to end a looping taunt. Even aliases to plus taunt don't work here. Also, all special abilities like sandwich eating or flog crits will work with this, but Scout's Colas just don't. Even without special binds, the taunt button just doesn't work with Scout's Colas. Now, Engineer players may be wondering about another taunt. Putting Eureka Teleport 0 or Eureka Teleport 1 in the console will use the Eureka effect to teleport to spawn or you teleport to exit respectively as long as you have the Eureka effect active, but the use command can let you do this as long as you have it equipped. The console may say the command is invalid, but the console is lying. Another interesting fact about these commands is you can use them while you're already doing the Eureka effect taunt to change your destination. Like other taunts, this can also be used during humiliation, and you can use it to teleport people, which is really funny. At first glance, this may just look like a faster way to swap your loadout from the 4 available, but swapping to your current loadout still responds you with full health and ammo. It even preserves your buildings in Uber, though other meters will reset. Also surprisingly useful against spawn campers, especially for resupply lockers and right next to the spawn doors. In addition, some maps with larger respawn triggers will let you do this just by touching a spawn door, even if you haven't unlocked that spawn room yet. And I've gotten away with some pretty funny Uber sawing on Borneo's red spawn, considering the trigger for the entire room stays present after it becomes accessible to both teams. Unfortunately, the respawning is disabled during humiliation, so you can't just teleport around the spawn room to confuse that soldier out of rocketing you. Oh, speaking of dying, probably the most well-known binds. You push the button and you die, unless you're in humiliation. I also like using this alias setup to force the button to be pressed twice in case I press it accidentally. Add move to your movement key so it'll cancel the kill bind if you move. It also has some niche competitive use for denying X on kill loadouts to whatevers, but come on, you wouldn't do that to me while I'm just trying to get the funny Uber using completely reasonable means. Well, come on, it's not like that Uber's gonna get much use anyway, considering how few casual players actually seem to know what to do with it when I give it to them. Besides, even Valve agrees binds aren't cheating, and it's not like I'm using wall hacking. Medics can see calling teammates through walls, but how do you get your team to just abandon you for the 2 billionth time to call you back? Well, TF2 has a client-side setting to automatically show medic calls on people below a certain HP threshold, and like any other setting, it can also be done as a command, meaning you can set a key to toggle it between the HP threshold you'd normally use and an absurdly high one that'll guarantee all teammates and disguised spies are below it. Now you can see where your team is and screw over spies even more than TF2 already lets you do. Yeah. By binding your movement keys to these rather than the standard movement commands, holding opposing movement keys moves you in the direction most recently pressed rather than stopping you entirely. Marginally improves strafing and not much else, but it takes so little effort to implement that you might as well use it. By substituting whatever key you bound to plus jump with an alias that jumps and ducks simultaneously, you perform a crouch jump, which lets you jump higher, cross larger gaps, rocket jump easier, and screw over snipers a little. While the same effect can be achieved just by pressing your jump and crouch keys simultaneously, that is annoying, and I personally find much more use in this bind. Since you can switch bindings for each class, make your medic alt-fire also switch to the medigun, since its other weapons lack any useful alt-fires, and his Uber is the most important alt-fire in the entire game. Just put as many of these in the middle keyboard space as you can. Fun fact, these can also be helpful for taunt kills, since they override whatever voice line the taunt kill uses to telegraph itself. The disguise command can be used to change disguises and even undisguised, so the class numbers are a bit jumped up. Reconnects you to the server you're on, but if you're about to be auto-balanced, you won't be when you come back. As featured at the start of the video, say team, and say party can be directly bound to a key to open the chat menu or ran with arguments and shout a message. Competitive players sometimes use this to announce Ubers. The build and destroy commands can be used to do just that as the engineer, so I completely replaced my PDAs with them since they're way faster. For the past while, I've just had my build destroy binds taking the 4, 5, 6, and 7 keys on my keyboard, and they still take a bit of time to reach since I use the arrow keys, but I've already got so many keys bound. If only there was a way to use even less keys while still complicating the entire thing further. So here's what I've done to my binds recently. First, using the same alias changing method used as growth or weapons, I used modifier keys to change the aliases for other keys. So I've mapped each movement key to a different building and used a much closer key to actually build it based on the last direction pressed. And I've done the same to a few other actions. As for mapping all the weapon actions to as few keys as possible while keeping the game playable, I've actually managed to condense most class features down to just 2 mouse buttons with varying results. All background gameplay also uses 6 new binds to get an idea of their general playability, though be warned, I'm actually quite bad at some of these classes.
Thanks, soldier!
Like most classes, these guys all have 3 weapon slots, so comfortably fitting this into 2 buttons without resorting to using what as a discount scroll wheel may seem far-fetched. To do this anyway though, we bind 1 weapon to each button, then use a combination of both buttons to fire the 3rd weapon. Due to weapon switch speeds, any weapon can be swapped to without firing it by tapping its button combination, though holding the 3rd weapon would be impossible because one button would always count as released before the other, leading to one of the first 2 weapons being held instead. Thus, I've made it so the 3rd weapon can instead be held by releasing only the first mouse button, which can easily be accomplished with a state-based design. For the same reason, we need to carefully choose how our weapons are mapped to consistently switch to the 3rd weapon without firing it the other 2. Luckily, all melee weapons except for spies have a delay before firing, so this problem can be solved by making the melee weapon one of the first 2 weapons and making sure to always hit that mouse button first when switching to the 3rd weapon. For my binds, I have my primaries mapped to the left mouse button, the melees to the right, and the secondaries to both. While this part is common to every class except Spy, how alt-fires and reload actions are handled may be different. For Scout and Soldier, they have so few alt-fires that I'm fine with just binding them to another button, and Demoman's ability to detonate stickies or charge from any weapon effectively gives him way too many alt-fires to avoid binding to another button. Therefore, the final count is technically 3, but 2 for most Scout and Soldier loadouts. You might think that the Air Blast and Detonator cause the same alt-fire problem as Demo, but due to the flamethrower emitting flames so gradually, it seems it's actually possible to hold it and press the left and then right mouse buttons without using any primary ammo. Thus, we can bind this action to the Air Blast. As for the Detonator, the long reload time just lets me bind the release of the firing key to the detonation and holding it to not detonating the flare. Thus, every alt-fire is accounted for.
Put this.
The Heavy has an alt-fire in every weapon, though some are more useful than others. The fists simply control which fist to punch with, which offers no mechanical difference apart from the animations. Meanwhile, dropping the sandwich and ribbing the minigun are used so often that they may as well be the primary fires. So, I did exactly that. Left-click revs the minigun, right-clicking while Rev fires it, holding right and then left drops the sandwich, and the taunting trick from earlier is used to eat it, which may or may not count as another button.
Your mother?
Spy's Knife is an instant melee, and using it could drop your disguise, so instead of using it to swap to the 3rd weapon, I bound right mouse to the Snapper due to its lack of a cooldown or consequences for using it whenever you're not facing a building. The leftmost button is now the knife, and while I was experimenting with the system where pressing rightmost button twice would use a revolver and switching to the sapper requires switching back to the knife and then to the sapper so that holding both buttons at any time can cloak you, this just doesn't work too well, so I use the third key for cloaking.
Peace.
Sniper's scope uses the same technique as Heavy's revving to fit it into two buttons, but I left it separate as I should also mention it plays a bit jankier than Heavy does. But Sniper and Heavy are boring anyway, so who cares. Also, the focus and Preki meters use a third button.
Medic gaming!
While the crossbow and Uber all work as you'd expect, the metaguns actually have a lot of alt fires, the Uber, resistance switching with the Vaccinator, and the projectile shield at MDM. Due to this, and the fact that he's one of the few classes I actually play a lot, I've been playing around with a few control schemes to see what's the best, such as binding those actions to 3 separate buttons, or by using only 2 buttons and binding Uber charge to holding only the left button while the metagun is held. Either way, the medic needs 4 buttons. Also, in case you're wondering where the metagun is a slightly harder weapon to access rather than the crossbow, I find that when speed really matters, you'll either be needing to defend yourself, or whoever else direly needs assistance would be much better off with the crossbow's burst healing. The only exception to this being having to quickly pop an Uber.
Stupid face.
Engineer is the most complex class by far, with the third button already being necessary for buildings, going up to 7 buttons if the movement keys count, and potential alt fires on every slot. He's the one class I'm confident you can't fit into 2 buttons while keeping playability intact. Sorry. So, here's the totals. Now, at this point, the competitive players watching this, assuming there is anyone watching this, are probably wondering when I'm going to mention graphics configs so that they can make their game look even more like a bad Minecraft mod to save 2 more FPS. And that's about all I'm going to say about that. Though I guess there is one thing. You can display text on screen using Developer 1 and the Echo command. With the right filters, you can ensure only Echo commands display, though other commands will still clear the chat. And now, for the really exciting part of the video. Making a working calculator using the developer console and source keybinds. If memory and command length limitations are ignored, the source developer console programming language should be Turing complete, essentially meaning it could theoretically run any program. Therefore, we can use it to make a calculator, as long as we don't find multiplication freezing the game for a few frames, though admittedly, I haven't optimized it. So, how do we implement such a calculator? Well, we'll need to store memory and make branching code based on those stored values, which could be done with aliases. First, we make an alias for each state of the memory, which we'll store in bits. A bit is an object with 2 states, typically referred to as 0 and 1, so that's how we'll name our aliases. Then, for each bit in our memory, we'll need an alias defined as one of our bit state aliases. Now to branch code, we set the 0 alias and the 1 alias to the code we want for each case, and run the alias used to store the memory we are testing. Then, based on our knowledge of aliases, either the 0 or 1 code will be executed. Because we have branches like this, and the code in each branch can define other memory aliases, we can start adding memory transfers and binary operations. And we'll set the result to 1 only if its inputs are 1, OR does the same if any input is 1, XOR does this if both inputs are different, and incrementing the output inverts it and sets the carry bit to 1 if the output was 1. 1-bit addition is hastily implemented as a conditional increment in roughly the same manner. Now, 1-bit is not that useful, so 32-bit registers are made with 32 aliases, 1 for each bit. Addition is done the same way you might do addition on paper, performing addition on each bit of the number and adding the carry bit to the next bit. Subtraction can be done with a simple trick. By inverting every bit in the number, we get a number that is -1 minus the original number. By then running the addition routine while originally setting the carry bit to 1, we then get -1 minus a plus b plus 1, or b minus a. Multiplication is done with another trick. By shifting every bit in the number, we can multiply or divide it by powers of 2 easily, much how multiplying or dividing by 10 in base 10 is as easy as moving the decimal point. Because we now know what powers of 2 add up to make a binary number, we can multiply the other number by each of those and add them together. Now, all 32-bit numbers could be multiplied together in a maximum of 32 additions. By the time we have multiplication finished, number input to the calculator can be done by multiplying the number we are currently typing by 10 and adding the typed digit. Now we can already verify the calculator works using manual base conversion, but how can we get it to output our familiar 10-digit numbers directly? This is where division comes in. If we repeatedly divide a number by 10 and round down, the remainders we get will be each digit of the number. With a few branches based on each bit of the digit, we can find what digit it is and display it. So how do we divide? Assuming both inputs are positive, we subtract the denominator from the numerator until the number becomes negative, indicating no more of the denominator could fit into the numerator. The number of divisions while the number was positive is now our result rounded down, and the last positive value the number has is our remainder. This process can be sped up by multiplying the denominator by decrementing powers of 2 before subtracting, narrowing down to the same subtraction count on remainder at about 32 subtractions. Now we just need to find when a number is negative. This is actually really easy though, if we take advantage of our limited space to store numbers. You see, up until now we've been actively choosing for a sequence of bits to represent that number in binary because it makes addition, subtraction, and multiplication really easy to implement. It also allows us to store any integer within a nice continuous range while also having a well-defined overflow method. Doing calculations while discarding bits past a certain point makes the number wrap around the range of bits that were calculated. Much like how doing paper math but ignoring everything past the hundreds place would make numbers wrap around at 1,000. To preserve these properties while also allowing for negative numbers, we shift this wraparound range back so that any number with the highest bit set to 1 is now negative. Now to check the sign of the number, we just check the last bit, or alternatively we could have a look at the carry bit after every subtraction. For programmers, this property is actually why conversions between signed and unsigned integers don't require any work by the computer. They both store the same data, and even use the same internal math instructions in some cases, mostly addition, subtraction, and multiplication. Now the final part of division is actually handling the negative values, but we can just subtract them from 0 to convert them to positive values, and subtract the division result from 0, which should have been negative based on the signs of the inputs. After all that, and adding a few more registers to store numbers in so I could actually implement division, the calculator is done, and we even have a crappy little assembly language to go with it. And yes, I know that there's a command to increment the different settings in the developer console, but there's still no way to execute different aliases based on their values, so the calculator still needed to store and operate on any data in alias form. Now, while the calculator does work, there are quite a few improvements I could already think of to make it faster and more usable, so if anyone watching can think of any good uses for doing math in your keybinds, let me know and I might be able to make it happen. The calculator should work in any game made in the source engine where you can access the developer console, so maybe it even have some non-TF2 uses that I don't know about, though the other binds obviously are likely only relevant to TF2. Lastly, if anyone for whatever reason actually wants my convoluted mess of key bindings, then let me know of that also, so I can know whether to actually bother with putting them online anywhere. Thanks,
And have fun.